So I'm going to tell you an old story back when I was a colonel in the Air Force and give you an idea of the nuances of the power of the supplier versus the buyer. This is an A-10 bullet, the bullet that's fired out of an A-10 airplane. I flew that in my early days back before you all were born. Don't worry, there's no powder in this, so nothing can go boom. But it's big and it's heavy and it's cool. That's why I like to show it to you. So in the summer and fall of 2001, I went to the Pentagon and took over a division, running a division. And one of the jobs of that division was to buy the legacy munitions, the old bombs and bullets. Typically, we've been spending about $250 million a year to just replace the basic stockpiles of bombs and bullets and other sorts of devices that go boom in the night. Well, 9/11 happens. The 9/11 happens. As you might imagine, we start to talk about we need more money because everybody knows we're getting ready to fight a war. But you have to understand government money is kind of funny. It comes with all sorts of rules. So the particular money that we got right after 9/11 had to be spent very quickly, or in the procurement speak, had to be executed. And so I was running excursions where I would go from spending $250 million to having to spend $1 billion in a year. And believe it or not, that's very difficult for an industrial base who's been working on this much money to say, can you eat that much money? And oh, by the way, you have to use it all within the next 12 months. Well, one of the people that said we can do that were the manufacturers of A-10 bullets. But there's a little more to the story. I had a critical need for A-10 bullets, but I had a critical need because I only had two manufacturers. Both of them had had quality issues and produced inferior bullets, such that the Air Force had put them aside and said, we won't shoot those in training. We'll only use those in combat as a last resort because we're worried that their defects will cause the airplane to explode. Kind of a serious issue. And so I had this critical shortage of A-10 bullets, not because I hadn't spent a lot of money on them in the past, but because my producers had handed me something that was no good. I told you I had two producers. Both of them had been decertified. Only one of them had recently been recertified by the Air Force. So my guys are coming to me and they're saying, hey boss, we need to do this. We can put like $100 million into A-10 bullets, maybe as much as $250 million into A-10 bullets, address a critical need, and the money will be spent like that. But I'm a taxpayer too, and I said, I'm not too sure I like these guys. I'm not real enamored with the idea of throwing them the biggest contract for A-10 bullets ever after they've had such poor performance. So this went on for a while. And finally, the company said, we would like to pitch to Colonel Stambaugh and convince him that our quality control problems are in the past. So my guys come to me and say they want to meet with you. I say, that's fine, but this is shortly after 9/11. As you would imagine, my schedule is crazy. And I say to them, I can only meet with them from 6:30 to 7 in the morning. And they call back and say, we'll take it. So that particular day, I usually got to work about 6 a.m. That particular day, for some reason, I was running late and I was hoping upon hope that they were late. They weren't. So I pull up to come walking up to my office, and there's five guys in very expensive suits waiting on me while I had to literally go through the safe cracker routine of opening the door. Has a big safe combination dial on it because of all the classified material we had in the office. I go whipping them in, so I'm starting out behind. Tip, not good for a power negotiation to be late to the meeting, and it was in my place, it was my meeting. So I started off in the hole, and I'm doing the little business card exchange with all of them. Don't really pay any attention to it. Sit down, have the 30-minute meeting. They tell me all is great and wonderful and that they're ready to be good stewards of the government money. We end the meeting, and they go on about their business, and I go on about my business. So keep in mind, they had five guys show up to attend a 6:30 meeting with a colonel. And even though I may think a colonel's pretty important in the big scheme of life in Washington, D.C., colonels usually aren't very important. So as I'm looking through the business cards after the meeting is over, I see that I met with the CEO of Alliant Technologies, which is at that time was a Fortune 50 company. In other words, one of the 50 largest companies in the United States. And the CEO came to a 6:30 a.m. meeting with a colonel. And I bet he wasn't even based in Washington. I bet he had to fly in for the meeting. Well, why did they do that? Well, as a buyer, they only had as a supplier, they only had one buyer. That was me. That was the United States Air Force. Where the Navy has a few of these guns, but they use very few bullets compared to what the Air Force uses. So for that supplier, they had one buyer, very concentrated buyer, and they had to make me happy because believe it or not, it was pretty much my decision. By the same token, they had me over a barrel because if I was going to spend this money for A10 bullets, I had one supplier. So even though it seems very easy to figure this out, in reality, there's a lot of nuance. So let's go on. The next power is the substitute products, and this is one that often trips people up. By definition, a substitute product is something that is not in your industry, but provides a service that can be substituted for whatever product it is that you supply. So I was just reading an article about how when the trains had some problems in the Northeast Corridor, about the rise of these luxury buses that are relatively cheap, that have Wi-Fi hotspots, and how they're really pressing the airlines because they provide a fairly quick transit from Boston, New York City, down to Washington, Baltimore, and these buses, likewise cars, all compete with the airlines. For years, Southwest Airlines said our competitor is the car, not the other airlines. It wasn't true, but it made for a great slogan. So there's another way to scratch that need to be somewhere, the car or a bus versus the airline. An industry that's just been devastated by a substitute, obviously, are newspapers, as people increasingly go to the web to get their information, and the advertisers' dollars follow that. Think about this: cable TV versus Netflix. What does cable TV provide for the most part? Entertainment. What does Netflix provide? Entertainment, but of a different sort, different business model, different type of entertainment. On demand, much broader choice versus cable serving up whatever we've got on the 150 channels and nothing on is worth watching. So you can see that they're competitors, even though if you were to line up in the industries, they're not in the same, they're in the entertainment industry, but they're not in the same segment. And then here's an interesting one that points out the competition for dollars. Think of the in-stadium NFL experience versus compare that to now the home experience with the large screen high definition TVs. Just think of Jerry's World down in Arlington, Texas. What has it got? That big screen TV so that people can look up and watch the replays just like they do at home. That's a big deal to get people to come into the parks. The NFL's newest stadium out in California for the San Francisco 49ers has got uber wiring. I mean, it's got a zillion hotspots so that people can be on their phone, texting, tweeting, watching highlights from other games, all that other stuff, because they found that's what fans want to do. Even while they're watching one game, they want to be able to monitor lots of other games. And so they had to increase the connectivity in their stadiums to compete with that. And here's the key. What did that cost? That made those stadiums more expensive, which drained profit away from the companies as they responded to the substitute product. And that's how substitute products can cap profitability. The last force is the rivalry among competitors. A lot of these things make sense. They're well discussed in the article, but let me point out a couple of things. Why does the presence of numerous equally balanced competitors matter? That's because they can snipe at each other a lot. If you have an 800-pound gorilla, boom, they set the rules of the industry, and people don't tend to mess with each other. Right now, the airline industry is under investigation for illegal collusion because with the consolidation in the industry, there's only so many big players. And even though they're not directly colluding, they're under investigation to see whether they're watching what each other is doing so they can kind of follow the leader. So now we've gone from numerous to only a few, which makes tacit collusion easier. Obviously, when the industry stops growing so quickly, if I'm going to get a bigger share of the pie, what am I going to have to do? Make your share of the pie smaller. And we'll talk about that more in competition. High strategic stakes means I can't afford to lose. High fixed costs. This is where, even though I may lose money on a product, I lose less money because my fixed costs are so high, I would lose even more money by not making it. That defined the car industry in the 2008-2009 downturn. High exit barriers, I've got nowhere to go. At one point in the mid-2000s, over 50% of the seats crisscrossing the United States on a daily basis were flown by an airline that was in bankruptcy proceedings. Why in the world did somebody keep loaning them money to keep them alive? Because the creditors to the airlines knew that their number one asset, their airplanes, were going to be sold for pennies on the dollar if the airline actually went into liquidation. So that was a high exit barrier that caused them to compete brutally on costs. So let's wrap it up now. Actually, in the interest of time, I'll stop now and we'll wrap it up on the next slide or the next video segment. See you then.